In this episode, we talk about a dispute regarding Shahi Eidgah Masjid, which is claimed to have been built over the birthplace of the Hindu deity Lord Krishna in Mathura. We also give you an update about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's comments on the Lok Sabha security breach. But first, we talk about COP28. Hi, I'm Utsa Sarmin and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last week, the 28th edition of the Global Climate Conference concluded in Dubai, where world leaders, climate activists and policymakers congregated to discuss and decide on concrete ideas to combat rapid climate change, the effects of which are increasingly being felt across the planet. And this includes the fact that 2023 has emerged as the hottest year in record, with several months of this year experiencing record-breaking temperatures.
Daily temperatures this year breached 1.5 degrees target several times, in fact, almost 90 times this year.
That's Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha, who writes on climate and science for the paper, and he says that when it comes to climate action, the world is not doing enough at the moment.
We are not doing very well. There is an increasing gap between what needs to be done and what we are doing in terms of climate action.
Now, this year, Amitabh travelled to Dubai to cover COP28. But before leaving for the summit, we had spoken to him about loss and damage, which was a crucial decision made during last year's COP in Egypt. This decision involved the establishment of a fund to address the impacts of extreme weather events. If you are interested in learning more about loss and damage, you can click on the link to the episode provided in our description. But the reason we are talking about it today is because since the fund's inception last year, no money has been channeled into it.
So this year, two things happened. One, the fund was formally created and it was decided to house it within the World Bank for 4 years. And after that, it will be on its own. So that was one decision. And the second, more important, it was capitalized. So the first round of capitalizations happened. And about $800 million were promised into it. So lots of countries made pledges or commitments to send money into it. The total of it came to about $800 million. So these two things happened on the loss and damage fund.
And in addition to this fund, COP28 also witnessed other important outcomes. These include, among other things, an assessment of the world's progress in combating climate change, a gradual shift away from fossil fuels, and a commitment to reduce methane emissions and various other noteworthy developments. To know more about these developments, we speak to Amitabh in this segment. So Amitabh, let's first start with global stocktake or GST, which was the main agenda of COP28. Could you explain what GST is and what it aims to do?
Right. So it was a stock-taking exercise. And this stock-taking exercise is actually mandated within the Paris Agreement itself. So when the Paris Agreement was decided in 2015, within the Paris Agreement, it is written that the first stocktake would happen in 2023. And every subsequent 5 years will have another stocktake. So stocktake is a sort of a review exercise, just looking at where we are in the fight against climate change and where we need to go and what we need to do more than what we are already doing. So it's a general sort of a review exercise that was supposed to happen. So it did. That was the main agenda at this COP. Incidentally, the next stocktake, which is 5 years from now, would be held in 2028. And if you recall, Prime Minister Narendra Modi made this offer in Dubai that 2028 COP, that would be COP33, would be held in New Delhi. So, the New Delhi COP would see another stocktake exercise 5 years from now. So the global stocktake or the GST did happen. And whatever the decisions that have flown from this COP28 in Dubai are actually decisions taken as part of that GST exercise.
Right, and speaking about these decisions, one of them involved transitioning away from fossil fuels. It was the first time that this was discussed and it became a hotly contested issue, right?
Right. So the mention of transitioning away from fossil fuel was one of the reasons that COP28 was in a deadlock for about 3-4 days. This is a contentious issue. This was something that was, a lot of pressure was being built to have a language on fossil fuel phase out in the COP28 document. Now, incredible as it may sound, but over the years, the climate negotiations are happening for almost 30 years now. There are hundreds of decisions that have been taken over the years, and none of these decisions ever mentioned fossil fuels. Just the mention of fossil fuel was also not there. And the reason I say it's incredible is because, fossil fuels are the main reason why emissions happen. Fossil fuels generate almost 80% of all the greenhouse gas emissions that we see these years. So what was happening was, till now, the focus was on emissions, that is the end product, how to reduce emissions without actually talking about the source of these emissions, which are the fossil fuels. And the reason for that was there are lots of countries whose economies are completely dependent on fossil fuels. And this year, there was a lot of pressure to have a language on a phase out of fossil fuels. So there was a discussion, and as expected, there was a lot of resistance, mainly from oil producing countries, which did not want a language on phase out. And these countries also got support from a lot of other countries, even countries like India or China or South Africa. And then finally, the compromise that was struck was, it talked about transitioning away from fossil fuels. Now, these are all semantics. Even if a phase out had been agreed to, there was no timeline that was being discussed. So it wasn't as if a fossil fuel phase out mention would have led to a gradual phase out of fossil fuels in the near term. And the fossil fuel debate and the way it was finally reflected in the COP28 document is more about symbolism rather than any concrete sort of measure, in the sense that the first time fossil fuel has been acknowledged, the first time fossil fuel has been mentioned in the COP28 document. So there is a symbolism attached to it. But it is only that. I don't think it means too much as of now in terms of concrete climate action.
So Amitabh, you mentioned that India was careful when talking about fossil fuels. And we know that India had also claimed that they're not in a position to give up coal as a source of energy and production for electricity. But that got a separate mention, and countries also agreed to phase down coal, right?
Yes. So what had happened was coal came under separate pressure, not here. Coal has been under pressure for a long time. And in 2021, 2 years ago, at the Glasgow meeting, a separate language on coal was introduced. And India fought, and it had the support of a lot of other countries as well. And we changed the language from phase out to phase down. Again, these are semantics. There is no timeline. A phase out would inevitably include phase down. There is no phase out without a phase down. And we really don't know what the real meaning of phase out or phase down in these negotiations are, because they have not been defined. As I said, in Dubai, there was stiff resistance to fossil fuel phase out or phase down. But coal, because it had already been singled out in Glasgow, and these UN negotiations, there is no scope for backtracking. You cannot go back. You can only go forward, meaning you can only strengthen climate action. So there was no going back on coal. Therefore, that same language continues in Dubai as well. And coal is important for India, but not just India. Coal is important for a lot of other countries as well. South Africa, China, lots of other countries. So their stand is that if you have to talk about fossil fuels, talk about all of them, not just coal. But the way things stand as of now, coal has been singled out. And even in Dubai, the phase down of coal is a separate provision, and the transitioning away from fossil fuels is a separate provision right now.
Right, and COP28 also saw a promise to triple renewable energy to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Can you tell us how the world is faring when it comes to that, and what is the goal for 2030?
So right now there's about a little less than 3,500 gigawatts of renewable energy is installed globally as of now. And by 2030, the plan is to at least triple the capacity and not take it to somewhere around 11,000 gigawatts. Now, what that will do is this will reduce the dependence on fossil fuels, and it will avoid certain amount of emissions. So the International Energy Agency says that this will lead to an avoidance of about 7 billion tons in carbon dioxide equivalent emissions by 2030. So that's something quite concrete. That's something significant. And this has been agreed to in Dubai at COP28. Actually, it comes with another measure. It's not a standalone measure. Tripling of renewable energy capacity comes with doubling of energy efficiency rate of growth. So if the efficiency of the economy, what is the energy efficiency? It is the efficiency of the economy, as in how much emissions are generated per unit of GDP created, right? So that is the measure. And this efficiency has been gradually increasing every year. And the idea is to increase this rate of efficiency. So at least double it between now and 2030. So that's the aim. So tripling of renewable energy, doubling of energy efficiency rate of growth. These two go hand in hand. And this is something that was agreed to. And this is, as I said, quite a significant step forward in our climate action.
Right. And another concrete goal that we saw is the promise to reduce methane emissions. However, you have reported that this can cause some concerns for agriculture-based economies like India. Could you talk about that aspect?
So the methane emission cuts have to be seen along with the provision on tripling of renewable energy in the way that these two are the only measures that might lead to additional emission reductions in the period till 2030. And one of the primary sources of methane emissions is agriculture, standing water in crops, also livestock, belching of livestock is one of the sources for methane emissions. Now, these two things, agriculture, livestock, again, very sensitive areas for developing countries, including India, because if you want to rein in methane emissions, you would probably have to tinker with your agricultural cropping pattern. And that's an extremely sensitive area for countries like India, Philippines, a lot of other countries, especially rice-producing countries. So it's a problematic area for a lot of countries, methane emissions. Right now, the provision is that countries should make efforts to cut down their methane emissions. And there is no target, there is no quantified target for any country. So, even if a country says, okay, I've made 0.01% reduction in methane emissions, that should be fine.
Right, and apart from all these, there were also another important outcome which was demanded by developing countries, and that is to formulate a global framework on adaptation. Could you talk about what was the consensus on this issue?
So that's a more complicated subject, mainly because when we say global goal on adaptation, it has to be defined. What exactly can be a global goal on adaptation? So as you would appreciate, adaptation is essentially a local exercise. So a country, say, wants to create seawalls. An island country, for example, which is getting submerged, would want to create seawalls to prevent water coming inside the island. So that's an adaptation exercise. So these adaptation measures, these are not global. These are local measures. And the benefits of these adaptation measures actually are quite local in nature. But what was happening is, developing countries had been complaining that because these are very local and they are defined in local terms, not enough resources and not enough attention was being paid to adaptation. So these countries had been asking for adaptation to be defined in global terms. So there was an exercise that was happening for the last 2 years to define these global goals on adaptation. And the outcome of those 2 years of discussions was presented at this COP28. And those outcomes were adopted by this meeting. Therefore, a new framework on global goals on adaptation was decided upon. And the climate-induced impacts on agriculture, for example, reducing climate-induced impacts on health, reducing climate-induced impacts on water scarcity. So these are things that are global in nature, common to everyone. So a framework has been finalized and it was adopted by COP28. A new work program has been created to look at the kind of indicators that can be developed to measure progress on these global goals of adaptation. How do you measure whether the climate-induced health impacts are getting reduced or not, whether work on that is progressing adequately or not? So how do you measure that? So the indicators for those measurements have to be developed. So as I said, this is a more complicated subject and it is a work in progress. But yes, the first step was taken in this direction in Dubai at COP28.
And lastly, Amitabh, how would you describe the outcomes of the latest COP, considering how rapid climate change had been?
So all COPs, all climate change conferences have produced underwhelming results. They have performed far below expectations, and COP28 is no different. I mean, if you look at the gap between what was expected and what the final outcome was, there's a huge gap. And this is true for all the previous climate change conferences as well. They have always underperformed, and so did COP28. But that's the nature of these negotiations, the way they are designed. This is UN process, and the UN process works through consensus so that every country must endorse the final outcomes. And these are not majority decisions. These are consensus decisions. And when everyone has to be on board, obviously every country has competing interests, and what can be expected is only the lowest common denominator kind of result. And that's what COP28 has also produced. These are important decisions, but these are lowest common denominator. So, I mean, like, as I said, every other COP, like every previous COP, this COP can only be described as underperforming COP.
And next we talk about the Sri Krishna Janmabhoomi and Shahi Eidgah Masjid dispute. Last week, the Allahabad High Court allowed a court-appointed commission to enter the Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura and carry on an inspection of the mosque complex. Now, this comes after Hindu petitioners demanded this survey, claiming that the Shahi Eidgah Masjid has been built over the birthplace of Lord Krishna in Mathura, a situation similar to what we have witnessed unfolding in the case of Gyanvapi Mosque in Varanasi. To know more about this matter and its similarities with the Gyanvapi-Kashi Vishwanath temple case, we speak to the Indian Express's Asad Rehman in this segment. So Asad, can you first tell us about the Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura and why is it controversial?
So the Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura is located close to the Keshav Katra temple there. And Hindu petitioners and Hindu believers since ages have been claiming and saying that the mosque is built over the spot where Lord Krishna was born and that it is the Bhagwan Krishna Janmasthal. So this mosque, the Shahi Eidgah Mosque, was built during British time, during Aurangzeb's period. And the Hindu petitioners claim that it was built on top of a temple and that it was built on the place where Lord Krishna was born. And that is the reason that this mosque, like two other mosques in UP, is surrounded by controversy and is seeing a long-drawn legal battle for decades.
Right, and like you mentioned just now, we have seen similar legal battles play out in two other mosques in Uttar Pradesh. Can you explain what the similarities are between these three mosques?
So the three important mosques in UP which have been in controversy for more than 60-70 years are the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, the Gyanvapi Mosque in Varanasi, and this Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura. So the common link between all three mosques and temple disputes that we are seeing in UP, Kashi, Mathura and Ayodhya, Kashi is Varanasi. The Gyanvapi Mosque, the Hindu believers and petitioners claim is built on top of a temple and that it's part of the Gauri Shringar Sthal. Similarly, Ayodhya, the Babri Masjid they had claimed was built on top of the Ram Janmabhoomi, which is the birthplace of Lord Ram. And now the latest case is the Mathura one, which is that the Hindu petitioners claim that the Shahi Eidgah Mosque is built on top of the Janmasthal or the birthplace of Lord Krishna. So in the specific Mathura case, which is the Shahi Eidgah case, the Hindu petitioners say that there are signs and symbols of Hindu religion, which is contrary to how Islamic architecture is, Mughal architecture is. So they claim that there are signs and there are symbols of Hinduism within the mosque, and that is why they are claiming ownership of the said property in dispute, which is the Shahi Eidgah Mosque in Mathura.
Right, and like you mentioned, there have been multiple lawsuits filed in Mathura by different petitioners. Can you tell us about the latest petition and how this case has played out so far?
The 8 petitioners, some of them are next of friend of Lord Krishna. They say that this Shahi Eidgah Mosque is built on the Lord Krishna birthplace, and that they want an investigation of the site, which is the mosque, to ascertain if the mosque is built on top of a temple. So in May this year, the Allahabad High Court had transferred all the petitions. There are multiple petitions with regard to this Shahi Eidgah Mosque dispute, which have been ongoing in the district courts of Mathura. So in May this year, the Allahabad High Court transferred all the petitions and all the pleas to itself regarding this particular dispute of the Shahi Eidgah Mosque. And one of the cases, which is filed by these 8 petitioners who are devoted Hindus, and they filed an additional application seeking the appointment of a court commissioner, which means that a commission will be appointed, 3-member or 5-member or how many, the number is still not clear, and that a commission will be appointed, and the commission will go inside the mosque, do videography, photography, and make observations and submit a report based on the findings to the Allahabad High Court. So this is what their plea is, that they want a court-appointed commission to go inside the mosque complex and make observations, take photos, and come back and submit a report to the Allahabad High Court.
And what has the Muslim side's counter-arguments been?
The Muslim side has multiple counterclaims. One of their most important stands is that this suit itself, the basic suit, not this particular application for the court-appointed commission, but the suit itself is barred by the Places of Worship Act. Now, the Places of Worship Act of 1991 is a law passed by the Indian Parliament in 1991, saying that apart from the Babri Mosque and the Ram Janmabhoomi dispute in Ayodhya, all other such disputes will remain as they were on the day of independence, which is 15th August 1947. So the Muslim side claims that this suit itself, the basic case itself, is barred by the Places of Worship Act. And they also claim that the suit and the claims by the Hindu side regarding presence of Hindu signs and symbol within the mosque are imaginary and do not have any evidence to back it up and are based on non-factual claims by the Hindu side.
Right, and Asad, can you break down the Allahabad High Court's latest order and what it means for this case?
So the High Court, in their order which was passed on Friday, has allowed a court-appointed commission to go into the mosque, do videography, shoot. The details of who will go and what the commission will comprise are still not clear. That will be decided at a later date. But for now, the application filed by the Hindu petitioners seeking a court-appointed commission to go inside the mosque has been allowed by the Allahabad High Court, and the Allahabad High Court has said that the appointment of a commission at this point is not legally barred, and that if the Muslim side has any objections to the commission or the proceedings of the commission, they can raise it in the court at a later stage.
Right, and just last week, the Supreme Court declined to stay the High Court's order. Could you talk about why it chose to do that?
So, during the hearing on Friday, a day after the Allahabad High Court passed the order, the Supreme Court said that at this point it's not going to interfere with the High Court order, and that if there is any adverse order which is passed, then the Muslim side can approach the Supreme Court. But it refused to stay or interfere with the Allahabad High Court order on Friday.
Right, so Asad, what happens next in this case? And what would you say are the things that we need to keep in mind about this matter?
So on December 18, the Allahabad High Court, December 18 is this Monday, the Allahabad High Court is going to have a new fresh hearing in this case, and it's going to decide the modalities and the other details of who will be part of the commission and who will go and do the survey of the mosque at this point. And after that, I think once the Allahabad High Court appoints a commission, it goes to the mosque. Like we've already seen in the Gyanvapi case and the Babri Masjid case. The Gyanvapi case in May last year, similarly, a commission was appointed. The commission went to the mosque and conducted their work. and during the survey or the inspection by the commission, shivling was found there. Then after the report was submitted and the proceedings for the commission survey were completed, the Varanasi court then ordered a ASI survey of the Gyanvapi Masjid, which is currently ongoing. The survey work in the Gyanvapi Varanasi mosque has been completed, but the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, is yet to submit a report to the Varanasi court, which I think will happen in the next 7 to 10 days. Same thing had happened in the Babri Masjid case also, when in 1950 court-appointed commission had gone, and then in the early 2000s an ASI survey was ordered. And the same thing happened in Gyanvapi, and now I think it's moving in a similar direction that the same thing might happen in the Mathura case as well, where the court-appointed commission has already been cleared by the courts. And now, maybe after that, once the proceedings of that commission is complete, we might see an ASI survey being conducted of the Mathura mosque as well.
And in the end, we give you an update about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's comments on the Lok Sabha security breach. Yesterday, Prime Minister Narendra Modi termed the security lapse in Parliament, which happened on the 13th of December, as sad and worrying, and said that it was important to know the elements behind this incident and their intentions. Speaking to Hindi news daily Dainik Jagran, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "The gravity of the incident in Parliament should not be underestimated at all. Therefore, Speaker Sir is taking the necessary steps with full seriousness. The investigating agencies are investigating strictly. It is equally important to go into depth as to what are the elements and intentions behind this." Unquote. He also said that it was necessary to go into the depth of the matter so that a solution can be found, adding that squabbling or protesting over it should be avoided. Meanwhile, in his first comments on the security breach, senior Congress leader Rahul Gandhi blamed Prime Minister Modi's policies for it, alleging that they had led to a rise in unemployment and inflation in the country.
ब्रीच हुई है वो है, बट क्यों हुई? जो देश में सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा है, बेरोजगारी का मुद्दा, जो पूरे देश में उबल रहा है, मोदी जी की पॉलिसीज के कारण हिंदुस्तान के युवाओं को रोजगार नहीं मिल रहा है. तो ब्रीच जरूर हुई है, बट इसके पीछे कारण बेरोजगारी है और महंगाई है.
Additionally, the opposition has been demanding a statement by Union Home Minister Amit Shah in Parliament over the security breach that saw two people who were carrying smoke canisters jumping from the visitors' gallery into the chamber of the Lok Sabha. Both of them were heard chanting slogans such as "Tanashahi nahi chalegi," which loosely translates to "dictatorship won't be accepted." They were ultimately overpowered by the Lok Sabha members and the ward staff. Around the same time, two other people also released coloured smoke from canisters while shouting slogans outside the parliament premises. The families of the suspects say they were despondent over not getting a job. A total of 6 people have been arrested in connection with the incident so far. The security breach inside the parliament came exactly 22 years after the 13th of December 2001 attack on the building that had left 9 people dead. You are listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Utsa, Sarmin, Rahel, Philipose, Niharika, Nanda and Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it and share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.